All right, today we're going to talk about volume again, but today it's going to be kind of special situations. So right now what I would suggest is you should probably get a piece of paper to do some of these examples on your own, or at least write them down. And the three formulas you need are the volume for cylinder, cone, and sphere, which I have written right here. Today we're going to round to the nearest hundredths and use the pi key on our calculator. All right, and remember, feel free to pause the video if you need to as we go. Okay, so right now we're going to talk about a cylinder, but the cylinder, what we're going to notice is that it has a volume of 100 cubic centimeters and a radius of 4 centimeters. So we're actually trying to solve for the height and not the volume in this situation, which it's pretty easy. So my number one step for you guys is you should always rewrite the equation for a cylinder or whatever shape you're working with. So that's what I did right there. The volume of a cylinder is pi times the radius squared times the height. From here, we should plug in the information that we know. So we know the volume is 100, so that would go in for V, the volume. Pi is just a number, we're going to use the pi key. My radius is 4 centimeters, that's going to go in for R, and my H is what we're actually solving for. So what we're going to notice here in my next step is I just plug those numbers in. The 100 is V for volume, and the 4 is R for radius. Cool. So from there, now we have to solve for the height. Now we have to solve for the height. So what I do is I rewrote it, and then we need to get rid of the 4 squared and the pi so that we're left with H. So the opposite of multiplying, or the inverse of multiplying, is dividing. So I'm going to divide both sides by pi times 16, and you're probably thinking, where'd you get the 16 from? Oh, well, that's 4 squared, okay? So when I do this, these are actually canceling out, and then in my calculator, I would just type in 100 divided by, and then pi times 16. You could put those in parentheses and just press enter in your calculator, and you should get 1.989, but since we're rounding to the hundredths, we need to look at the second decimal place out, which is this 8. So does it stay in 8 or does it round up to a 9? We look at the next number, which happens to be a 9. It's greater or equal to 5. So that means this 8 needs to change into a 9. So my height is 1 99 hundredths centimeters. So almost 2 centimeters. So I would write in 2 centimeters right there after solving that out. Okay. Now my next example is going to deal with a cone. Now the cone here, once again, I'm telling you that the volume is 220 cubic inches, but the height is 5 inches. So we're actually solving for my radius in this problem. Now to do this, there's all the little steps, but the first step is you should plug in what you know. I know my volume and I know my height. So I'm going to plug in for V and H, and boom, that's what I'm left with here. Now what you're going to notice is that this 1/3, my best first step is I like to multiply both sides by 3, because that's going to cancel out this 1/3. So if I do that, this is what I'm left with. Because if I multiply both sides by 3, it cancels out the 1/3, and 220 times 3 is 660. Now from here, I rewrite it, and then I divide both sides by pi times 5 because I want to get this radius r by itself. And I just type this in on my calculator, and then I end up getting 42 and 17 thousandths equals r squared. But I don't want r squared. I want just the radius, not being squared. So you have to think, what is the inverse or the opposite of squaring a number? It's taking the square root. So if we look up here now, this is the same information. The square root of 42 and 17 thousandths is 6.482, and then it rounds to 6 and 48 hundredths. You're gonna notice when you get to this step, it's actually a way bigger number. Like, it goes out a lot more decimal spaces. The more decimal spaces you go out, the more accurate your answer is, but 3 spots out is good enough. So then my radius, 6.48 inches. Cool. And then I noticed on, I think it was the quizzes that you guys did, some people were having trouble with spheres. So I wanted to talk about spheres here and what their equations are. Now, an actual sphere looks something like this, but then there's one that looked like that, and that's like half of a sphere. That's called a hemisphere. It just means that you take half of the volume and you get the volume for this. So I want to show an example like that. And we're going to use this right here. We're going to use this hemisphere with a radius of 8, and we're going to find the volume. So to do that, the equation is up here. We just plug in 8 for the radius. Boom. There you go. If they gave you the diameter, you would just divide it by 2 and get this number, but this is the radius, it's 8, and you just plug it in. So then when you do that, you end up getting 1,608.495, but that's as if it was a full sphere, like an actual basketball or something. But since this is half of it, you divide it by 2 because it's half of a sphere. It's as if you cut like a basketball in half, and you would get 804 and 25 hundredths cubic inches. So those are some special situations that you guys are going to do a little assignment with next.